sit down today because I've been a lot. It's going to be all right over here for you. So Mark, I was thinking about you during the camp because the director of the whole camp took me out to breakfast and he's like, I need the name of a good rum. Do you know a good rum? And I was like, why are you asking me that question? Because I'm Hispanic? He's like, no. He said, you had shared before that you were a cigar smoker, and I guess I mentioned it one time to him. And I said, well, without a doubt, pirate. And I was telling him about how, I introduced you to it, and then one more person that I introduced to pirate.
So you get an eye patch with that?
Say again?
You get an eye patch with
that? Actually, that right there, gentlemen, is one of the things that I wanted to say is that I know that it came up in conversation right after Charles gave his talk that the number one challenge that we have is being evangelizers. We evangelize all day long about other things. Okay? In my own way, I'm an evangelist for pirate rum. And anytime anybody asks me about pirate rum, or asks me about rum or good spirits, or what's a good drink to pair with cigar, I talk about pirate rum. And one might even say that I'm somewhat passionate about that. And I overheard a conversation over here just a moment ago about the switching between Android and Apple. And if you talk to people who own Android telephones, they're passionate about their Android telephones. And you talk to people who are Mac heads, they're passionate about their MacBooks and their Apple products. And they share that with people. Some people, that's all they blog about. And so anytime that you have recommended a great restaurant or a movie that's showing and you're pumping it up, whether you're just doing it by word of mouth or putting it up on Facebook or whatever social media that you may or may not be using, you're being an evangelist. Okay? Because all evangelization is. Let me give you a definition from Guy Kawasaki. Okay? You may not know this name. I'm going to share with you why he's important in just a moment. He said that evangelization means convincing people to believe, and in this case, in a secular setting, he says, in your product or ideas as much as you do by using fervor, zeal, guts, and cunning to mobilize your customers and staff into becoming as passionate about a cause as you are. Now, Guy Kawasaki in the late 80s, like 1984-ish, was the chief evangelist for Macintosh. And if you go online on career websites and Google evangelist, most corporations have that position in their companies now. So the secular world has usurped the term evangelism, not in necessarily a bad way. It just means that this is somebody that's responsible for getting the word out for their particular product or service. I got introduced to Guy Kawasaki way back in, I guess, 1992, 93, when I was still working for a financial services company, and my manager made us all read Guy Kawasaki's book. And if you take out the secular terminology, it's like a handbook for evangelization. In fact, the use of the word fervor is the exact word that John Paul II uses when he was describing the new evangelization. All right? So let me back up for just a moment and say that there are a couple of assumptions that I make as we move forward with this discussion about practical tips to evangelization. And I think it can be summed up in that little catchphrase that we've talked about from almost the very beginning of Joe Catholic is learn, live, share. You have to be learning about your faith and living your faith before you can share your faith. So the presupposition is that you are learning it. You're here, so presumably you are, unless you're just on autopilot. And secondly, that you're living it out in your everyday lives. Okay? Remember, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. You've heard me say it once. Is that we're called to live our Christianity 24/7, all the time, not just on Sunday, right? So in the workplace, at home, wherever you are. All right. So let me give you a couple of Catholic definitions of evangelization. Let me give you one from St. John Paul II from Redemptoris Missio, number 33. And he broke it down into two types of evangelization. Primary evangelization and new evangelization. Primary evangelization is preaching of Jesus to lands and people who have never heard the gospel before. Okay? I call that old school evangelization. Okay? New evangelization is just the rekindling of the faith in people and culture where it has become dulled. That's our culture. That's the European culture. Pretty much the entire Western culture. You know? And you read the documents of Vatican II, that's what they talk about. When we talked about Lumen Gentium, when we talked about Gaudium et Spes, when we talked about the role of the laity in the modern world. All those documents talk about us being out in the world, transforming the culture, infusing the culture with Christian ideals. And that comes from us. That's what evangelization is. Okay? And so the first thing is, before I get into the meat of the talk, is you got to believe that it's the truth. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to evangelize. So, to borrow a phrase from the ticket, you got to get right with ball first. Okay? Before you can go out into the world. So if you have your own personal doubts, it's going to come out. Now, I'm going to tell you up front. Okay? Most of us in here are not called to be theologians. That's not what we're called to be. Okay? You're called to be just everyday Christians living the faith. And in fact, in preparing for this talk, I came across a wonderful quotation from Cardinal Dolan in a speech that he gave right as he became a new cardinal, in which he said that when he had become a new priest, the bishop that ordained him said to him, "Now that you've got all this theology, go out and teach the faith in childlike manner." Because I would contend in some ways, I don't know about Mark, but I know that after 3 years of going through all these classes, I've got a lot of information in my head. Coming here and teaching has been more difficult because we don't need theology in here. Okay, this is catechesis, and there's a little bit of a difference in that, but it needs to be more practical. Does that make sense? I mean, if you want to dig, and part of the mission here is that when you get a little bit from us here, I mean, we could talk about evangelization. You know, it could be 4 or 5 semester classes. It's not the goal of these sessions to teach you everything about every topic that we do. It's to give you kind of some surface material, give you some resources so that you go back and study more, right? So that, you know, you're either going to the primary documents or you're going to the catechism, or you're, you know, or even if it just means going to Joe Catholic and reading the blog posts or the sources that are up there, or going back and looking at some of the videos, stuff like that. All right, so moving forward with a couple more definitions, and then we'll get into the meat of the tips. Catechism 849 says evangelization is preaching the gospel to all the people in all the nations. Pretty straightforward, right? That comes straight out of the Gospels. Okay? It's Matthew 28, towards the very end, which says, go out to the world and preach to all the nations. And then in the Catechism number 905, it says that evangelization is the proclamation of Christ by word and by testimony of life. Okay, we hear that a lot now, don't we, about living our lives, to go out and preach the gospel with our lives, right? Sometimes the deacons will say that at the end of Mass, right? Has anybody heard that before? That's what that means. And then it specifically says, for the lay people, this evangelization acquires a specific property and a peculiar efficacy because it's accomplished, listen to these words, in the ordinary circumstances of the world. So when I talk about ordinary daily life, that's not me coming up with that stuff. That's the church saying that. That we're supposed to be evangelizing in our everyday lives and the circumstances that we find ourselves. Now, how do we go about doing that? So, I'm going to give you a list. Do you have anybody in here that's in sales or used to be in sales? What does ABC stand for?
Always be closing.
Always be closing. Okay, in a lot of ways, and so I would say, how about ABE? Always be evangelizing. Okay? Because, you know what Bush used to say, that we're in sales? We're in sales. Okay? Evangelization is the sales part of it. We're the salesmen of the church. Okay? And I mean that in a positive way. You might have some negative perceptions of salespeople, but I mean that in the most positive way possible. All right, so I want to share a couple of bullets from Guy Kawasaki's book, because I want to compare them to the handout I'm going to give you that came out from the Archdiocese of San Antonio. That's pretty darn excellent. And if you follow that, you're going to be on target. And then hopefully, if I have enough time, I'm going to give you some pointers on internet evangelization. Okay? Because I don't think that we're doing a very good job of that as an apostolate and individually. All right, so I'm just going to bullet through these real quick, and then we'll compare them. All right, so the first thing he says is that you have to have a strong cause. Something you believe in. All right? Can you get on board with believing about Christ? Is that a strong cause? Yes? No?
Yeah,
Maybe?
sure.
Okay. You have to love the cause. Okay? Do you love Christ? Do you love His church? Okay? Here's an interesting one. He says, look for agnostics and ignore the atheists because it's hard to convert people to a new religion. What do you think the church says about that? How would the church respond to Kawasaki's bullet on evangelization?
We don't ignore anybody.
That's right. We don't ignore anybody. We evangelize everybody. I wish Sullivan was here. You could have heard that because I know he's struggling with somebody who claims to be an atheist. I always say claims because I don't think anybody really lives their life like an atheist. What do y'all think?
Oh, they live their life in a way.
Really? You think so?
Oh, sure.
In all aspects of their lives, they live it out as
In
atheists.
many aspects of their life. They're not concerned about the afterlife or where they're going to end up based on their decisions. Absolutely.
Okay.
Catholic Radio was had
Yesterday?
their session late afternoon, and we're asking for only atheists, agnostics, and Gnostics to call in. It was interesting to hear what someone would say.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, they're
Say again? What did you say?
They were listening to Catholic radio, huh?
Yeah, well, let's see. That tells you something right there, you know? They're already one step in the right direction. All right. So, yeah, we don't ignore them. The fourth thing that he says is that localize the pain. In other words, he says make it personal, that whatever your cause is, it's a solution to their problem, their individual problem. Can you say that about Christ and the church? Yes. Christ is the answer to every question. All right, let people test drive the cause. Try us out. You might like us. Can we do that in the church?
Bringing the mass.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bring them to Mass or bring them to an activity, introduce them to Joe Catholic.
Bring them to confession.
Warn me if you're going to bring them to Joe Catholic.
Bring them to confession.
Any of those things. All right. And he says, learn to give a demonstration or show the cause in action. And I interpret that to mean is like, are you living it out in your own life? Are you demonstrating that you're on board with whatever your cause or thing is? Do we see that in the church? Potentially. I don't know that we do a good enough job with that, but that's all right. Provide a first safe step, and I think that's very similar to I'm not sure they take it in the Mass as the first safe step, but maybe inviting them to help you serve tacos at Autumn Fest. Okay, I use that as an example because that's the very first thing I ever did at St. Catherine, was serve tacos at Autumn Fest. And the rest is kind of history. He says, ignore, why is that funny? Ignore pedigrees. In other words, just focus on everyday people. Does the church do that? Yeah. Never tell a lie. Never tell a lie. In other words, for us, don't sugarcoat it, don't water it down. Just tell the truth. The truth will speak for itself, right? Okay? We can be our own worst enemies when we're out there talking to people about our faith. First is we got to get it right. We got to make sure that we're saying exactly what we really believe and not some misconception or misinterpretation. And secondly, you don't need to water it down. Why are you giving me that look?
Just looking at
It's
you.
just
Sorry
German,
about that.
it's just the German in you.
No.
By the way, congratulations.
Thank you. For what?
World Cup.
The World Cup.
Oh,
I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but my maternal grandfather was half German, so I was rooting for the Germans.
yeah, we were wondering.
It was the All-Pope World Cup, man.
We were wondering if Benedict and
Francis
had a
had-
side bet on
yeah.
the deal. Plenary indulgences or something.
There, speaking of interesting ways to evangelize, there's a young guy named Jason Brock, who's a cartoonist, and he has started about a year ago. It's unbelievable. In less than a year's time, he has just exploded in the Catholic blogosphere and on Facebook. And he's even been on EWTN. And he just started this within the last year of turning his regular cartoons into Catholic cartoons. And he does this thing called Frank and Ben. He does these little cartoons of Francis and Benedict having little conversations over coffee. And they're funny, but there's a little theology in there too. And that's the sort of thing that captures people's attention. And he exploded on Facebook, and that's the only place he was at first, just sharing his cartoons, and now he's got a job with some Franciscan mission, and EWTN had him on their news program a couple of weeks ago. And this is a young man that just decided to take his regular talent that he was trying to use in the regular professional world, and just decided to start doing some Catholic stuff with it.
What's his name again?
Jason Brock, B-R-A-C-H. And remember your friends. Be nice to people, in other words. All right, so that's Guy Kawasaki, who was, the evangelist guru for the Macintosh. You remember when that came out in, I think it was 1984, when they had that crazy commercial during the Super Bowl? Anybody remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It's the Orwellian thing where they had this runner and they throw something through the IBM PC. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out. Goes against everything I believe as a teacher. So I'm going to give you the handout in advance. I normally don't give out the handouts first. I give them out at the end. Come on in, enjoy this, sir. And I promise you, we are not going to do a spiritual inventory today. I say that because Tom was saying that the 2 times that he's been able to make it, because he's normally out doing Habitat. We've done a spiritual inventory the 2 times that he's been able to make it. So if you'll take one of these and pass it down, please.
They are front and back.
Yes, that looks good.
So like,
All right, so we're gonna go, so whoever winds up with the stack, I'll come get them from you in a little bit at the end of the session. All right, so let's go over these together. All right, so the first one, we have been talking about this for quite a long time. The witness of life. In other words, you gotta be living it out. You can't be a hypocrite. You can't, there's no way that you can evangelize and not be living it. Okay? And this is the part of evangelization that doesn't require any words. That the way people see that you treat other people, the way that you make decisions, you know, that you're showing good moral character, that you do the right thing even when people aren't presumably watching you. Yes, sir.
Be joyful.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be later on in here too, but it's part of it. Yeah, absolutely. You have to be joyful. I think, say again?
The Pope just mentioned something like that in some recent tweets.
Yeah, he's been talking about joy from like day one.
And he's been giving a hard time to the priests and the nuns, saying, you guys don't act joyful, and how do I expect everybody else?
Right. Yeah, I think the greatest witness is that, you know, I know sometimes things are so rough that we can't help but just be down in the dumps. But when things are going rough and you somehow, if you're able to remember the presence of God in your life and that God's there with you, walking with you, there's a way for you to still be joyful in those times. And let me tell you something. That can be the greatest witness. I know that Father Jack, who's the priest that I see for spiritual direction, he was telling me a story a couple of months ago about him making some hospital visits. And that he was visiting an older woman who was dying. And the joy that she had about her faith. And number one, she was ready. She was ready to die. She was ready to be with Christ. But even in her last moments, she was using those last moments of sharing her love of Christ just by being joyful through this hard time. And how that touched the hearts of the people who were taking care of her. That's the type of joy. Father Jack said, he said, when I went in to talk to her, she witnessed to me. I didn't witness to her. And it doesn't always have to be that dramatic. But just in the way that we handle our daily lives. Okay? I like the second one. We don't have, include God in our vocabulary. Don't be afraid, Don't be afraid of being pegged as a holy roller or whatever they call people these days. Oh, you're one of those people. Yeah, I am. I am one of those people. I acknowledge that there's a God who's greater than me, that without him I would not exist. The moment they say you're one of those people, you've started a dialogue. Hello. And I don't mean use that, and I know that the Archdiocese didn't mean to be in people's faces with this, okay? It's a subtlety. I've shared the story here before about when I had just come back to the church, maybe during church, when I started praying before meals at school and would do the sign of the cross. I didn't say anything to anybody. That was just my own little thing. And how that impacted a couple of people. That's including God in your vocabulary also, and with the witness of life. Okay, become a person of welcome. Some of you do a really good job with this already. You know that you're not only welcoming in the way that you engage people, but you open your house to others and whatnot. And you create opportunities for friendship. That's important. You've heard me say that a lot about friendship. Okay? If you don't get anything out of this, and there are no shortcuts to evangelization. Okay? You have to be, to use a financial term, you have to be in it for the long haul. This is a long-term investment. Okay? You're not day trading. Okay? And the other thing about it is that I fell into this trap when I came back, I don't know if this happened to any of y'all. But because of the background that I had in financial services, I was also a recruiter for my company. And I was a pretty darn good recruiter. And so when I came back to the church, I had that mindset about evangelization is just about recruiting. Let me go recruit some souls. It doesn't work that way. And it's not about notching, all right, I got one more soul for Jesus. Okay? Because you remember last week, or the last time we got together when we talked about not marginalizing people and acknowledging the dignity of people, then you are diminishing the value of that person. You're just seeing them as a means to something. Okay? They're not an in and of themselves. And so we have to respect them. And so even if you help one soul get to Christ, that's a huge thing. Just one. If Christ is willing to die on the cross for one person, then we should be willing to take the effort just to bring one person to Christ, right? Okay? And it's not about numbers. And I think we get too caught up in that. We look around and say, all right, how many people do we have here this morning? Okay.
16.
All right.
Hey, you're the numbers guy.
Yes.
Maybe you should be in marketing.
All right. So that's the whole thing about developing relationship, caring, and trusting. Okay? That takes time. That just doesn't happen. And maybe in the beginning you're not talking about faith. Let them bring it up. Okay? Maybe you're talking about what they're interested in. Right? Invest some time in what their interests are. Okay? Or establish a common interest. Okay? The only reason I took up cigar smoking was so that I could get closer to my middle brother, because he's a cigar smoker. Okay? And I know, one of the things about cigar smoking is it takes time. And when you're sitting around smoking a cigar, good conversation has a tendency to take place. So that's the only reason, and I enjoy it myself now, but that was the reason I did that. Okay? All right, let's skip down to number 7 for a moment, because you're going to get to read these on your own. Share your faith story. Okay? And I heard somebody say, and I don't remember who it was, you should be able to tell your faith story in like 2 minutes or less. You don't, I know many of you have gone through the church process, okay? You don't have to give your entire 15-minute witness, okay? Some of those witnesses were much longer than that, what we're calling. You just got to give a 2-minute, the highlights of why are you Catholic? Can you answer that question? Why are you Catholic? How did you come to be Catholic or come back to the church? If you don't have a 2-minute answer for that, that's your homework. Okay? It took me a long time to figure out what my answer was, and it was in a Why Catholic session that it came to mind. Kevin's the reason why I came back to the church. When Kevin and Stacy entered my life, I said, I've got this 8-year-old boy looking to me for what's right and what's wrong. I better get my act together. And that was the Holy Spirit moving something in my heart. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out, well, I just did. I just came. That's not an answer. But, when you look at that and you break it down, it's about fatherhood, right? It's about being an example to your son. That might resonate with somebody when I share that story. It may not resonate with everybody. That might not be the part of the story that I share. Some of you heard my witness. Okay? There are other parts of my witness that I might share with other people, right? You all have your own stories. And the work that God's doing in your life and how it's made a difference. Because Pope Benedict when he was our Pope, he talked about how evangelization is about conversion is about an encounter with Christ. We've got to give people an opportunity, one, to hear about our own encounter with Christ, and to give them an opportunity to encounter Christ as well. All right. Let's skip down to number 9. Extend an invitation. Okay, we talked about this a little while ago. Okay, invite people to events. And you got to, part of this is you just got to use discernment. Where are people? Are they ready for that? Okay. Sometimes I think Lyndon has shared this story before, and people in RCIA, husbands or wives that were not Catholic that had come to Mass with their spouse for years and hadn't become Catholic. And you ask them, well, why weren't you Catholic? Because nobody asked me to. I'm not making that up, right? That's happened a number of times.
No, the famous story is the priest asked the lady, how come you don't go to communion? I've seen you at Mass for 10 years. And she goes, well, Father, I'm not Catholic. And that's the same question. Why aren't you Catholic? Well, nobody ever asked me.
Right. And maybe you have a friend or a family member who's away from the church. Maybe they had a bad experience with reconciliation.
Or their parents had a bad experience with a priest
Mm-hmm.
who's dead.
Invite them back. Number 10 is an extension of that. Okay? If they're not in the church and they're starting to demonstrate an interest in them, that's where you get them in contact with Lyndon, RCIA. Okay? Get them plugged back in. And it might be that there's some other impediment, but you can do both at the same time. Maybe it's a marriage issue. Okay, get them plugged into RCIA, and while they're getting plugged into RCIA, learning about their faith, they start working on getting the impediment removed or determining whether or not they can. Right? All right. Number 11 is pretty straightforward. Okay, and that ties in with the notion of not watering things down. We call a sin, all right? But we don't judge the sinner. That's what that means. Okay, and we're not condemning. Okay? And that goes to number 12 as well. Is this, you got to know when to stop, when you're pushing too hard. Some people need that. Okay? And hopefully if you're developing a friendship and if you're developing a relationship, you know how hard you can push somebody and how hard you can't. I personally struggle with this. Some of you see that in action. Okay? I sometimes don't know when to back off. Okay? And so I know personally that's an area that I need to really work on. Okay? So also, identify your own weaknesses too. Is your weakness that you, at the heat of the moment, you forget how to answer a question? Maybe you need to have some sort of, until you get good at it, have a little cheat sheet of, common questions that you get asked from people so that you know how to answer them. I don't know. Whatever it is for you. Okay, but we got to get over them. All right, so I want to leave some time for Lyndon, so I'm not going to go over Cardinal Dolan's speech. I'll share that on the blog, but I want to talk about some internet pointers real quick. Some of you are on Facebook, some of you aren't. So my intent is not to tell you go sign up for Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. You do whatever you want to do. But if you are on social media, here's some tips about that, because I know some of you are. Okay? Use your social media for evangelization. Okay? One of the simple things that I picked up from one of the other blogs was post when you're going to Mass. Okay? I know some of you do that already. That's not a show off. That's an invitation. Okay? And I'm here to tell you it works. Okay? Several months ago, I was in adoration, and right as I was about to go into the chapel, I posted about to go spend some time with our Lord. Okay? Next thing I know, my brother shows up because he saw that I posted on Facebook, and that moved something in him. Okay? So you never know You know, you might post that you're at Mass or an adoration 100 times and it have no effect whatsoever, but the 101st time, it might. You never know, okay? And that's easy, okay? And I'm not advocating you do this when you're inside the church. You do it when you've parked and boom, hit it, okay?
You don't want to have a selfie with it.
Yeah.
With Father in the back.
Or a selfie with the tabernacle. I haven't seen that one. All right.
Father Matthew Galarian.
You're never gonna do that. Sworn off.
All right, so a couple of things about that. So whether it's Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter or whatever, don't be afraid to speak the truth. Okay? But the other thing is don't argue. Right? Don't argue on Facebook. It's pointless. And don't write anything on there that you wouldn't say face to face. Okay, you know, with your close friends, you can get away with a little bit more banter than you can with people that you don't know. It's Did a recent event come to mind or something, Mark? In an exchange on Facebook. I don't know about y'all, but I have friends on Facebook that are not Catholic or not Christian and post a bunch of garbage and sometimes anti-Catholic stuff.
Well, they're evangelizing for gay marriage, for abortion, whatever.
I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was going to say. The other side is out there evangelizing for the culture of death. So you got to pick and choose your battles. Okay? In those circumstances, if it's somebody that I'm close enough friend with, I might gently correct them and share something to. I'll share a link to a document or something that'll clarify. And then if they want to read it, good. If they don't want to read it, then that's on them. That's not on me. But I'm not going to get into an argument with them because it's just pointless. I have a former student who's very hateful, and with her, I just said, you know what, befriend.
I've heard that the two fastest growing organizations are atheists, and all for the internet, are the atheists in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, the Church of Latter-day Saints, I know for a fact, they have been on the front end of the use of social media. They really have. We're a little bit behind. So what I want to say about that is a couple of things. Share good Catholic material on your social media for those of you that are on there. Okay? It might be a link to an article that you've read, and just post it on your timeline. Sometimes people will read it if you don't. That are not your Catholic friends. Share videos, links to videos. One of the most effective things are memes. These little photos that have little words written on them, those are called memes. I just learned about these about a year ago. Okay, there's a guy who started his own little apostolate called Catholic Memes. Some of these are hilarious, but it gets people thinking and it gets people talking. Okay. So one of the things, and be brief about some of the things that you post on there, and the final thing I'm going to say is, if you're on social media, one of the first things that you can start doing is share the Joe Catholic stuff. It's great when y'all see the posts and you like them, but liking doesn't increase people reading them. You have to share them. Okay, so that if you're on Facebook, you click the share button, that puts it on your timeline, that means people read that. I track this stuff. Okay, so I know that the majority of the traffic that we get from Joe Catholic is not from our parish, and is not from this group in here. Okay, I've recently revamped all our YouTube stuff. We've got over 75 videos on the YouTube channel now. Okay, no one's looking at them. The most views we have on any of them is the visit to the bishop, and the reason that is because that's on our Who's Joe Catholic or About Joe Catholic. So when you go to that and people want to know who we are, they immediately see the video as well. Okay? But the average number of views is like 8.
You
Okay.
find those just by going Joe Catholic?
If you go to Joe Catholic, there's actually a button for YouTube now.
Okay.
And so you can go to them. And as I was sharing at the beginning, the titles are pretty descriptive. The dates are not. I haven't gotten that down yet. And what I was saying at the very beginning, when we were just sharing earlier before the beginning of the session, is that my goal is to organize them as playlists for months. So we can say, all right, this is January 2014 talks, and put them all together. And then also have them topically. All right, so that if you miss a session, then hopefully, like if for some reason you're out of town or whatever, and you miss, you know, last week's or 2 weeks ago workshop, you can go see them. There are 4 videos that for Charles, and I've linked them all together for his talk on dynamic Catholicism. Okay, and then the talk I gave on Catholic social doctrine is 2, and I'll link those 2 together too. So if you click on the first one, it'll automatically let you see all 4. All right. So, and you can share those too. When you go look at the videos or a number of buttons, you can share them on Facebook. You know, you can share them on Google or whatever. Okay. And so that's how you get the word out. And as I was leaving the dorm this morning, and I was listening to a video from a young priest, and he said the number one thing that's getting some of the younger people, and you know, we're not very young in here. Okay? We're not attracting the young guys. Okay. Short videos. And so that's going to be the next project, is we're going to start developing some shorter videos. Because he said that the average person on YouTube only watches 87 seconds of a video. And I pulled up the analytics on ours, and that's true. Most people won't watch the whole video, so we got to get them in that first 90 seconds, really. All right, so I hope this was a little bit helpful. You know, some of the stuff you've heard before, but at least you get a little bit of a handout. When I've already started a blog post on this that I'll probably have up tonight or tomorrow, because we're being able to turn around the videos much quicker now. And so I'll have the written part along with the video up probably tomorrow morning. And I'll have in there a couple of books. I didn't have time. I came across a book this morning that Ignatius Press put out that is really good. It's pretty much a handbook for evangelization. It's about a guy who's been in the trenches for 20 years, and he talks about how we as Catholics can evangelize. All right?
Thought I had thoughts. One, I think you're always evangelizing to everybody, so even this is evangelizing what you're doing. But the other thing I was thinking yesterday was to maybe give you some email lists, emails of like people who don't know about Joe Catholic, but can go on your mailing list and receive your invites when you have the meetings, so they're pretty
Sure.
non-intrusive, but
If you think they would be interested and they're not going to feel spammed, we can create a separate distribution list for them.
well, I've talked to them about coming, but they just don't quite come.
If
So
you
a little
think
bit
they wouldn't
extra.
be offended by being included in that email list, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I talked to them first.
Yeah. And that's, you know, the invitation part of it is invite people to this. And I know some of you have done that, and that's good. Or, you know, to whatever event that we have going on. All right.
Just going to make a brief comment on evangelization, and this is a challenge in my household. I really think my wife is outstanding at evangelization, and her conflict internally is that she feels in order to do that, she has to be a theologian. Well, it's true that she needs to know about her faith in order to be able to talk about her faith, and she's involved in sacramental development, so she has to understand what the church talks about sacraments. But I would venture to say that 90% of her evangelization has nothing to do with Catholic teaching. It has to do with reaching out to people when they're in need, and the pastoral sense of evangelization is really, really important. In fact, Father Matthew's not here, but that's the one thing that she worked with Father Matthew on, is his pastoral skills. Because that is part of his responsibility as being the shepherd for the parish. So, my topic is, and that's a selfish topic, because I'm going to present this tomorrow in a non-all-male setting. Why not women priests? Okay. The reason is because I have a young gal who has very strong Christian fundamental background, and that's her one question she wants to delve into. Why does the Catholic Church teach only men are priests. Okay, so I got a multiple choice question for you guys. I'm gonna simplify it. Jesus Christ,
Statistically, you're right.
it's multiple choice, some of you guys will have a better chance.
True, false.
Okay. Now, if this was on Google, we'd have 57 choices, okay?
Mm.
So what is the correct answer? God made man. Second part of this, 12 apostles. I know they did not have newspapers at the time of Jesus, right? So there was no want-ads. There was no internet seeking employment. The 12 apostles were chosen by whom?
Right.
By Christ. All 12 apostles were men, women, or other.
Man.
Okay. Our buddy Judas ran into some difficulty, right? They had to choose a successor. Two guys they drew lots for. I never knew, I can't remember who the runner-up was, but the chosen fellow was Matthias. One reason I remember that's my father's middle name. So when the 12 apostles chose their successors, again, they were men. So the actual, even though this is a fundamental doctrine of the church, that men are priests, the teaching is really this simple, okay? It's not any more complicated than that. One other point will be made, we talk about a lot, that we see Jesus as the groom to the church. Again, in Catholic teaching, a groom is a male, a female, or other.
Man.
Okay. So again, the scriptural basis is this simple, as well as the theology of it. In 1994, John Paul II said that this was an absolute teaching, a definite teaching, and it's not open to debate among Catholics. Now recently as what, a week ago, the press is saying that our current Pope is thinking about this. Well, he thinks about, as you know by his speeches, he talks, but he is not derivated from Catholic teaching. Does this resonate fine with the guys in this room? Any female members of your family find this topic challenging? Okay, so I'm gonna probably have a tougher audience tomorrow than you guys, okay? What is our first goal in life? First teaching of Joe Catholic. What do we want?
Heaven.
Okay. Does ordination guarantee you salvation?
No.
We have many, many examples of ordained men that are probably going to be challenged in their efforts to go to heaven. Is that right? Okay.
So Lyndon, I would say that one of the challenges is that when people have problems with the male ordination, that the two underlying challenges that are behind the scene, one is a problem with church authority.
Yep.
And then number two is that they have a misunderstanding about power,
Yeah.
between power and authority, and the issue of dignity. They somehow or another think that a woman's dignity is diminished by not being able to be a priest.
Okay, this is, Benedict been pretty strong about this, that those two are not equal. It's not equal. In fact, ordination equals service. And we don't have to look any farther than this right here, okay? The role of Christ, when we look at the role of Christ, the roles of service to the extreme, in fact, of his own death. Okay? This is always a challenging topic, and I've worked on this topic before, when we have the final Sunday of the year is Christ the King Sunday. Okay, that's not an earthly debate. So, this whole concept then of what is the role of women in the church, it's the flip side of this story. One of the comments that was made, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops 10 frequently asked questions about the reservation of priestly ordination to men. It said that it is absolutely the responsibility of the pastor to include women, and have women actively engaged in the service of the church. Okay? Most of you recognize that one of our biggest challenges is for the men of the church to be actively engaged in the service of the community. I know lots of you guys have been in meetings or on committees, and sometimes there's a lot more women than our guys. Would we all agree that men and women are wired differently? And I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time this morning, because I don't have a tremendous amount of time, but this concept of the groom and the actual construction of the church, including building, where women, if you see women, the role of women in the New Testament, the women were sometimes physically closer to Jesus than the men were. I mean, physically touching him, having contact with him, the pouring of oil. I mean, I want to use this word very carefully. I think there was a certain amount of intimacy with the women, other than Mary, than with the guys.
Yeah, I think the only other example that you see of him being that intimate with anybody is John.
Talking about the Last Supper and John laying his head on Christ's
Yeah.
breast.
Yeah, that's about the only other time that you hear him making contact like that with.
Women were the first people he appeared to after he resurrected.
That's right.
So the argument is, there could be the argument that the role of women is absolutely important. The only other thing I wanted to mention was, people say, well, is this just a cultural issue? And there's a couple of responses. One, we have many examples where Jesus was countercultural at his time. So if Jesus wanted to be countercultural on this issue, he would have been no difficulty of that happening at all. And one of the examples of this is the concept of bread and wine in the Eucharist, and how that's fundamental and cannot be changed. Even though we know we've been in communities where they've made attempts. But the purity of that has an intent. Question about what if a woman feels that she is discerning for the priesthood? What is the response to that?
It's a difficult answer, because you don't ever want to look at somebody and go, well, you couldn't be discerning, but that's not possible.
That's correct, because the church will only answer the call to men for sacramental priesthood. Women are called for religious life, or to be actively engaged in community life, then that is absolutely encouraged, even in academic circles.
Maybe what's the calling of the gift that she's been asked to give, rather than priesthood is just kind of a role.
Yeah,
You
it's a
don't
role.
get called to the priesthood, you get called to give something.
That's right,
yourself.
you're absolutely right, it's called to be a role of service.
And then you can find your role, whether it's called a priest or.
Well, there's another side to that too, and that sometimes I think even men misunderstand that they're called to participate in the priestly, role of Christ, but not in the ministerial priesthood. Can you say that better,
Yeah,
Mark?
yeah.
Well, it's the three powers or three,
Yeah.
priest, prophet, and king.
Baptism, yeah. Where all men and women are called to the priesthood. It's not called what is the word we're looking for? It's ex priesthood, it's a,
It's non-ministerial,
yeah, non-ministerial or
or hierarchical.
communal priesthood. We're all called to that, whether we're men or women. And there's no such thing as other.
Well, and that is very tied into the whole priest, prophet, and king. And I think that that's not understood, and so that impacts how women view things. I was gonna ask you, since you've run into this, I'm sure, several times, what is it when a woman is asking this question and is seriously trying to figure it out, not just being an agitator or something?
No, this is a serious person.
Yeah, what do they think they're going to gain, or what is driving the inquiry?
They want to understand as a church about equality and worthiness. Okay? So what you really have to build on is that they are called to do a lot of things. In fact, being a priest is actually a life of sacrifice. From the standpoint of, they're not going to have, this is a touchy topic now because we've had so much difficulty with priests, okay? I mean, my father, a Catholic light guy, and he says, Lyndon, the church needs married priests. And he tells me that every month. And I said, well, Dad, it's not gonna happen right now, okay? He goes, we already have Catholic priests, the Anglicans that come over. What does that harm? You know, so this concept of sacrificing marriage, sacrificing children, those are parts of it.
Well, Deacon Walt has pointed out that because of that, we now have very odd circumstance of divorced priests.
Yeah.
Because some of these people have come into the church and the wife cannot handle the changed responsibility of the husband because the Catholic priest is a 24/7 job.
It's a hard job.
So again, it's a topic, I mean, I don't think it's a showstopper for this individual, but it's one that I've held off on talking to her about till she can get through some of the other things that are more in my mind, more sacramental. And then, you know, this is a serious person, so they're not trying to agitate, I mean, I don't think it's that standpoint. It's more understanding what is the roles of men and women in the community, in the church. And then there probably are some hierarchical issues out there.
Well, you had put up there that ordination does not equal power, and I think, at least in America, people see hierarchy as relationships of power. And hierarchy is just a relationship. I mean, it's just a fancy name for how things are related to each other. But then we tend to see like the CEO is in charge, and so people equate CEO with Pope. But that model just,
Well, I mean, but if you're coming in at, there's, you know, on the decision-making process, not a tremendous amount of diversity.
True.
The College of Bishops that selects the next pope, there's not much diversity there other than perhaps geographical.
No, I agree, but what I'm getting at is the CEO of a corporation could go, you know what? We're done being Macintosh. We're gonna build tractors. The Pope can't do that.
That's right, that's a good
Okay,
point.
the Pope is a steward and a safeguard. They don't actually set policy,
Yeah.
because that was set 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, but they interpret it and they can move things, this whole thing about married priests. I mean, 50 years ago, we'd have never even considered that, right?
Right.
Were any of the apostles married?
Yes.
So why didn't we say, well, maybe they could be married? When did they come up with or they have to be celibate?
Roughly about 1,000 years ago is when that was
But
determined.
the
So,
topic, but the
so my
topic.
point is, these things have evolved, so why couldn't it evolve that women could become ordained?
Well, that's a difference in,
Yeah.
one of them is different than the other in
Yeah.
terms of,
Yeah, I think you're more likely to see married priests before you go to see women priests.
well, you're never gonna see women as priests.
That's right.
I would never say that.
No, I'm gonna say never.
Yeah, that's why they're saying it's a fundamental doctrine of the church.
It's part of the sacrament, it's the form of the sacrament, it has to be a man. Now, we've seen it before where people will, a rogue bishop or
Yeah.
something will claim that they've ordained a woman, that woman's not ordained. Okay, that woman is not a priest.
Yeah, they had it in Wisconsin, a Jesuit. He was, all his priestly faculties were suspended after he celebrated liturgy with the women who reported that she was a Catholic priest.
We can't change the sacraments like that. Now, the thing about the married priests, you're right, there were married priests. I mean, this just came up on Catholic radio the other day. Yeah, and the apostles, there's references in Scripture when Paul's talking about, they're bringing their wives. I don't have a wife. Okay, so, but that's a different,
Argument,
yeah.
or a different topic.
Well, but it's also different in terms of it's not part of the form of the sacrament. Like, the form of the sacrament of the Eucharist is a particular type of bread and a particular type of wine. Okay? We don't use grape juice. Okay? We don't use little fish-shaped crackers for our... I say that because I've been to a church that did that, not a Catholic church. Okay? That's not communion.
But in the bishop's comments, it made that exact analogy that the form and substance of the Eucharist is equal from a sacramental standpoint to the form and substance of the male as a priestly ordained priest.
Other rites of the Catholic Church, of the Universal Catholic Church, have had married priests since inception.
And that was point number 10, and point number 10 was we have to pray for reconciliation with those other parties, that's right.
I mean, officially, the priesthood, the not being married is a discipline of the church. It's not a doctrine. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
So that could be changed in theory.
Right.
The male priesthood is a doctrine of the
Correct.
church, unchangeable. So
Correct. And that's what Landon was alluding to.
there's a big difference in
Right,
those two deeds.
absolutely. And when John Paul II came out in 1994 and said, I can't even change that, he was acknowledging to everyone, look, this is a doctrine of the church, it's not going to change.
And it's based on, I walked through the scriptural part of it with Jesus and the apostles. So, okay, we have Charles volunteering to do the final prayer, it's very good.
One last thing, the best argument I ever heard was that if Jesus wanted to have women priests, he had a perfect example in his mother.
Yeah.
Right there.
That's exactly.
And
I was
he
getting ready
did
to say
it.
that.
Yeah. But he called her, and that's part of this commentary that they actually she was called to a higher duty.
It's true.
That's, the idea of equality is not.
We're really hung up on this idea of authority and power. It really comes down to that. Will you close this out?
In the Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Prayer of Saint Ignatius de Loyola. Lord, take all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my will. All that I have, you have given me. To you, Lord, I return it. Do with it what you will. I ask only for your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
St. Joseph?
Pray for us.
Mary, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Saint Catherine of Siena.